And Moshe said, Hear, O Yisrael, Yahweh your Elohim, Yahweh is one, and you shall love Yahweh your Elohim with all your heart, with all your being, and with all your might. And these words which I am commanding you today shall be in your heart. You shall impress them upon your children, and shall speak of them when you sit in your house and when you walk by the way, when you lie down and when you rise up, and shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes, and you shall write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. Shabbat shalom, everyone. Shabbat shalom to everyone worshiping with us at home. It's a blessing to be here today, the first day after Yom Kippurim for us here at the Congregation of Yahweh. And thought I'd give this message today to help us get started on the right foot, because we talked yesterday about repenting and walking right with Yahweh. And so what we're going to talk today, the name of the message is Remember the Sabbath Day. All right. Let's all turn to Shemot. That's Exodus chapter 20. Shemot chapter 20. Going to be on page 78 in the 98 ISR. And this chapter here includes the instructions that most people refer to as the Ten Commandments. All right, we're going to start reading in verse 1, and it says, And Elohim spoke all these words, saying, I am Yahweh your Elohim, who brought you out of the land of Mitzrayim, out of the house of slavery. You have no mighty ones against my face. You do not make for yourselves a carved image, or any likeness that which is in the heavens above, or which is in the earth beneath, or which is in the waters under the earth. You do not bow down to them, nor serve them, for I, Yahweh, your Elohim, am a jealous ale, visiting the crookedness of the fathers on the children to the third and fourth generation to those who hate me, but showing kindness to thousands to those who love me and guard my commands. You do not bring the name of Yahweh, your Elohim, to naught, for Yahweh does not leave the one unpunished who brings his name to naught. Remember what? The Sabbath day, to set it apart. 6 days you labor and shall do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath of Yahweh your Elohim. You do not do any work, you nor your son, nor your daughter, nor your male servant, nor your female servant, nor your cattle, nor your stranger who is within your gates. That seems pretty clear, doesn't it? For in 6 days Yahweh made the heavens and the earth and the sea and all that is in them, and he rested. And rested on the seventh day. Therefore Yahweh blessed the Sabbath day and set it apart. Respect your father and your mother, so that your days are prolonged upon the soil which Yahweh your Elohim is giving you. You do not murder. You do not commit adultery. You do not steal. You do not bear false witness against your neighbor. You do not covet your neighbor's house. You do not covet your neighbor's wife, nor his male servant, nor his female servant, nor his ox, nor his donkey, or whatever belongs to your neighbor. Now, are these the only instructions that Yahweh expects us to observe? No, I don't think so, because we know that these are not even regarded as the greatest commands when Yahshua was asked about which are the great commands in the Torah. So let's look at that. Matthew 22. Matthew 22. And that's going to be on... Well, let's see, we're going to be on page 944. We're going to start reading in verse 36. And I mentioned this off the camera, but I want to say that we're not just preaching to the choir today, because we've got new folks tuning in to watch us on YouTube all the time. And some of these things are going to be new to new people, I mean. And so we can all stand to look at it again. Matthew 22, verse 36. It says, Teacher, which is the great command in the Torah? And Yahshua said to him, You shall love Yahweh your Elohim with all your heart, and with all your being, and with all your mind. This is the first and great command. And the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commands hang all the Torah and the prophets. All right, now, these two come from Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 4 and 5. And we recite that every week when we say the Shema. All right? And it comes from YHWH, Leviticus chapter 19 and verse 18. All right? So when asked about which is the great command, Yahshua didn't even quote one of the 10 commandments. All right? Yet, when the young man asked him at a different time what was necessary to enter into life, Yahshua did indeed quote these as being necessary. And let's just take a look at that. Matthew 19, a couple of pages over. I'm going to start reading in verse 16. And see, one came and said to him, "Good teacher, what good shall I do to have," what are those next two words? "Everlasting life." And he said to him, "Why do you call me good? No one is good except one, Elohim. But if you wish to enter into life, guard the commands." And he said to him, "Which?" And Yahshua said, "You shall not murder, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not steal, you shall not bear false witness, respect your father and your mother, and you shall love your neighbor as yourself." Note here, when asked what one needed to do to enter into everlasting life, that Yahshua said, keep or guard the commands. And when queried further about which ones, he straight up included commandments from the 10 commandments. All right? Right along with, you shall love your neighbor as yourself, which we just read a moment ago was likened to the greatest commandment, which is loving Yahweh with all your everything, heart, being, might. Right? Now, I personally think that one of the reasons that Yahshua was saying this was to make it clear that he was talking about the Torah commands that are necessary for everlasting life, rather than the teachings of the rabbis, the traditions of the elders or the traditions of men. But nevertheless, he said that keeping these was necessary to enter into everlasting life. I think he was kidding or mistaken or not going to test it. I think he probably said what he meant, amen? All right. So we would have to assume that he thought that keeping the commands was pretty important, amen? All right. Now, I'd like for you to answer this next question for yourselves. Okay? Ponder this in your heart, not just your head, but think about this in your heart. Which is more important to you? Your day-to-day pursuits in this present life, the here and now, or everlasting life? What, I said say it yourself. Now we know what we're supposed to say. Okay? We know what we're supposed to say, but think about that in your heart. Matter of fact, I've got some instructions here I didn't get to. It said, don't answer out loud. Yahweh is listening to our hearts. And He already knows the answer. But He wants you to be honest with Him and with yourself. Right? Have you ever heard the old adage, out of sight, out of mind? I wonder if we ever sometimes get that reversed. See, sometimes the problem may be that we spend so little time actually thinking about Yahweh and so little time actually talking to Yahweh and sharing with Yahweh, but are instead pursuing our own desires, that we sort of get into that ostrich with its head in the sand state of mind, and we think out of mind, out of sight. You know? Now, we are referred to as His children, but sometimes do we act like a child with his hands over his ears and his eyes shut, saying, you can't see me, you can't see me. You ever seen a child do that? You're standing right there with the kid in plain sight, but the child believes that he has the power to take you out of his presence and then make you reappear when he decides that it's time for you to come back. Right? All right? Can you ever remember doing that as a child? I've done it as an adult. I can remember that. Do we ever do that now these days with Yahweh as an adult child of Elohim? Do we sort of get in that mindset that we are the ones with the power, able to make Him show up when we need Him, and then when we're through, release Him to go and do whatever it is that He does when we don't want Him around? Proverbs chapter 5. I'm going to start reading at verse 21, page 732. See, sometimes we have to ask ourselves hard questions so that when we come before Him on the Day of Atonement, that we can deal with what needs to be dealt with. You know? Proverbs 5:21. For the ways of man are before who? The eyes of Yahweh, and He considers all his paths. The wrong one is entrapped in his own crookedness, and he is caught in the cords of his sin. And one more verse in chapter 15. Chapter 15, on page 740. Wait till I hear the pages quit flicking. Verse 3. The eyes of Yahweh are in what? Every place. Doing what? Watching the evil and the good. That's what our Father's doing. Now, parents, have you ever been watching your child when they did not know that you were watching? Well, why did you watch? Well, you watched because you care. Sometimes you're watching brought forth nothing but watching. Sometimes your watching brings forth smiles. Sometimes your watching brings forth tears. But you watch because you care about them. Amen? Yahweh cares about us as well. And that's why He's watching. All right? Now, look at 1 Peter chapter 5. Two verses here. Page 1181. We're going to start reading in verse 6. And it says, humble yourselves then under the mighty hand of Elohim, so that He exalts you in due time, casting all your worry upon Him, for He is what? Concerned about you. Hallelujah. Hallelujah. Yahweh is there and Yahweh is watching. It is from Yahweh that everlasting life is given. Amen? All right? And if you want it, you're going to have to be pleasing to Him. And we can pretend that He can't see us if we want to. But He has no more left your side than do the others in the room do when the little child says, you can't see me. All right? Now, Yahweh expects us to do all that He commands. Not as a tyrant, but as a loving Father. All right? And that's actually why He gave us the Tzitzit to look at. Let's look at Numbers chapter 15. Bimidbar 15. I'm going to start reading in verse 37. Numbers 15, verse 37. And Yahweh spoke to Moshe, saying, speak to the children of Israel, and you shall say to them, make Tzitzit on the corners of their garments throughout their generations, and put a blue cord in the zitzit of the corners. And it shall be to you for a zitzit, and you shall see it, and shall remember all the commands of Yahweh, and shall do them. And not search after your own heart and your own eyes, after which you went whoring. We read a lot about that in Hosea yesterday. All right? So that you, verse 40, remember. What does remember mean? Don't forget, okay? So that you remember, and shall do all my commands, and be set apart unto your Elohim. He wants us to be set apart to Him. He can't dwell with unrighteousness, all right? He wants us to be set apart. And I am Yahweh, your Elohim, who brought you out of the land of Mitzrayim to be your Elohim. I am Yahweh, your Elohim, all right? So that we would not forget. See, first He had this written down. The commands, He had it written down, and it was added because of transgression. All right? It's kind of like you're supposed to know what the rules are at the house, but now we're going to write it down and put it up on the refrigerator because, you know, it seems like you need to read this to remember what you're supposed to do. All right? So then, to help us remember, He said to tie not a string, but 4 strings, so that it went in every direction that we might go. Right? And He knew that we needed a reminder. Right? And this brings me back to the commands that Yahshua was quoting from when He answered concerning what we needed to do if we wanted to enter into everlasting life. All right, now let's go back to Exodus chapter 20. Shemot chapter 20. Now, I want you to note that verse 8 starts with what word? Remember. All right. In addition to the fact that Yahweh says He wants for us to remember all that He commands, He starts this command with the word remember. All right. It's sort of like He's placing special emphasis on that one, doesn't it? All right. All right, so we've already established that remember means don't forget. All right, so let's look at that. Remember, don't forget the Sabbath day. To set it apart. 6 days you labor. Let me interject here. Yahweh doesn't always tell us why. This is one of these places where He tells us why. Okay? 6 days you labor and shall do all your work, but the 7th day is a Sabbath to Yahweh your Elohim. You do not do any work, you, nor your son, nor your daughter, nor your male servant, nor your female servant, nor your cattle, nor your stranger who is within your gates. For in 6 days Yahweh made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them, and He rested, not a 7th day, not any old day, but the 7th day. Therefore, Yahweh blessed the Sabbath day and set it apart. All right. Now, could it be that Yahweh especially wants us to pay particular attention to this, you think? All right. First of all, He is wanting for us to follow His example. All right. He wants us to follow His example, but He explains what the Sabbath is all about and why it is to be remembered. Because it is blessed of who? Yahweh. Right? Because this is how He celebrated after doing all of His work, all of the awesome and beautiful work that He did at creation. Right? Every time He did something during that week, every time He created something, He took a look at what He had done, and when He got through examining it, He declared that it was what? It was good. It was tov. It was tov. It says over and over, and Elohim saw that it was good. Now, have you ever worked on a project and after it was over with, you just sort of sat back and looked at what you'd done and relaxed and just sort of enjoyed the satisfaction that you felt as you surveyed? Yeah, of course we have. Well, guess, it might be a garden. It might be some landscaping. It might be a sewing project, a remodeling project, a writing project. You get the picture, all right? When people that you care about came over, did you make a point to share your joy of success with them? You know, hey, come out here and take a look. Yeah, look at this. Yahweh created the grandest thing that had ever been made. And He did it on this earth. And I can just imagine Him sitting back on that first Shabbat and relaxing and taking it all in and feeling the satisfaction that He must have felt when He surveyed all the things that He had made. He was so pleased that He wants us to enter into that joy and that rest with Him. This day is a memorial. It is a memorial, all right? And we celebrate Yahweh's Creation Day memorial every week. All right? And He wants His people to be excited about it as He is. And did you know what? It had not been for all the work that He did during that week, none of us would be here anyway. You know, there is that. Let's look at Exodus 31. Exodus 31, we're going to start reading in verse 13. And you speak to the children of Israel, saying, my Sabbaths you are to guard if it's convenient. Is that what yours says? If it fits in your work schedule. And you speak to the children of Israel, saying, my Sabbaths you are to guard by all means. For it is a sign between me and who? Me and you throughout your generations, to know that I, Yahweh, am setting you apart. And you shall guard the Sabbath, for it is set apart to you. Everyone who profanes it shall certainly be put to death. For that sounds pretty serious. For anyone who does work on it, that being shall be cut off from among his people. 6 days work is done. And on the seventh day is a Sabbath of rest set apart to Yahweh. Everyone doing work on the Sabbath day shall certainly be put to death, and the children of Israel shall guard the Sabbath to observe the Sabbath throughout their generations as a temporary covenant. It doesn't say that one either, does it? No, it says as an everlasting covenant. Funny how people want to make it temporary, amen? Or for a different group of people, for a different time, right? Between me and the children of Israel, it is a sign forever. For in 6 days Yahweh made the heavens and the earth, and on the seventh day He rested and was refreshed. And when He had ended speaking with him on Mount Sinai, He gave Moshe 2 tablets of the witness, tablets of stone, written with the finger of Elohim. All right? So let's do the math for just a minute. This is going to get real complicated. A believer, somebody that's joined themselves to Israel, a believer plus the Sabbath equals, see, we're not even going to do any trigonometry, not even going to do any long division or anything. All right? Just going to do a simple math, an addition equation here. A believer plus the Sabbath equals a person that Yahweh identifies as being one of His. Didn't we just read that? We're not doing Common Core. We're doing written in the tablets of stone. A believer plus the Sabbath equals a person that Yahweh identifies as being one of His, because they have the Sabbath sign that they are one of His. And if you don't have the Sabbath sign, or if you don't have the Sabbath, you don't have the sign. Okay? All right? So it's like a believer minus the Sabbath, not person that Yahweh's going to identify as one of His. All right. This doesn't mean that the Sabbath is all you need, but it does mean that you need the Sabbath. Okay. Now let's go back to the chapter where the tzitzit was given. Numbers 15. Bemidbar 15. We're going to start reading in verse 29, which is going to be on page 158. Numbers 15, verse 29, and it says, "For him who does whatever by mistake, there's one Torah, both for him who is a native among the children of Israel, and for the stranger who sojourns in their midst. But the being who does whatever defiantly, whether he is a native or a stranger, he reviles Yahweh. And that being shall be cut off from among his people, because he has despised the word of Yahweh and has broken his command. That being shall certainly be cut off. His crookedness is upon him. And while the children of Israel were in the wilderness, they found a man gathering sticks on the Sabbath day. And those who found him gathering sticks brought him to Moshe and to Aharon and to all the congregation. And they put him under guard, because it had not been declared what should be done to him. And Yahweh said to Moshe, the man shall certainly be put to death. All the congregation stoning him with stones outside the camp, and the congregation brought him outside the camp and stoned him with stones, as Yahweh commanded Moshe, and he died." You know, Yahweh says that it's not His desire that any should perish. Okay? All right. So, as a matter of fact, it appears that the reason for the tzitzit was a result of this fellow's failure to remember, there's that word again, to do what Yahweh had commanded about remembering the Shabbat. And Yahweh decided that we need a reminder, because it's not His desire that any should perish. All right? Don't get me wrong. Just because you're wearing the tzitzit does not mean that you can't do whatever defiantly. You know, it's not a good luck charm. It doesn't imbue you with special powers. It's a reminder to get you to use the resources that you do have. To remember. Verse 37. "And Yahweh spoke to Moshe, saying, Speak to the children of Israel, and you shall say to them to make the tzitzit on the corners of their garments throughout their generations, and to put a blue cord in the tzitzit of the corners. And it shall be to you a tzitzit, and you shall see it, and shall," what's the next word? "Remember all the commands of Yahweh, and shall do them, and not search after your own heart and your own eyes after which you went whoring, so that you remember and shall do all my commands and be set apart unto your Elohim. I'm Yahweh your Elohim, who brought you out of the land of Mitzrayim to be your Elohim. I am Yahweh your Elohim." See, we read this earlier, but now we see why. Because Yisrael was not remembering, and Yahweh was giving them this reminder so that they would not die for disobedience. All right? And the reason that we're talking about this is sometimes people have questions about it. They ask for help because they want to be obedient to Yahweh and would like to know just exactly what to do and what not to do. And hopefully we're not seeing Yahweh as an Elohim that gives us a list of do's and don'ts with whom we have a you better or else relationship. All right? Yahweh is a loving Father who gives us instructions so that we might live. Amen? Deuteronomy 30. Devarim, chapter 30. Page 218. I'm going to start reading in verse 19. Deuteronomy 30:19. "I have called the heavens and the earth as a witness today against you. I have set before you what? Life and death, the blessing and the curse. Therefore you shall choose life, so that you live, both you and your seed, to love Yahweh your Elohim, to obey His voice, and to cling to Him, for He is your life in the length of days, to dwell in the land which Yahweh swore to your fathers, to Abraham, to Yitzhak, and to Jacob, to give them. That's why He gives us reminders. So, I can't tell you exactly what to do and what not to do. You know? But I can give you some things to think about that might help you make the decisions. And some of them are common sense, like this one. You do no work. Okay? That's like a no-brainer right there. All right, you do no work. All right? But Exodus 28 says, remember the Sabbath day to set it apart. 6 days you labor and shall do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to Yahweh, of Yahweh, your Elohim. You do not do any work. You, nor your son, nor your daughter, nor your male servant, nor your female servant, nor your cattle, nor your stranger who is within your gate. All right? So that's pretty clear. But some things are a little more ambiguous. The problem starts with when we try to figure out how to keep on doing our own desires on the Sabbath. Right? And that's where we start running into some problems. So let's look at two things. Isaiah 58, YHWH 58. We're going to start reading in verse 13. We're going to be on page 459 in the 98 ISR. That stands for Institute for Scripture Research. If you're ever wondering. Verse 13, Isaiah 58, 13. It's going to be a while. If you do turn back your foot from the Sabbath, from doing your pleasure on my set-apart day, and shall call the Sabbath a delight, the set-apart day of Yahweh esteemed, and shall esteem it, not doing your own ways, nor finding your own pleasure, nor speaking your own words, then you shall delight yourself in Yahweh, and I shall cause you to ride on the heights of the earth, and feed you with the inheritance of Jacob your father, for the mouth of Yahweh has spoken. And then Exodus 31, I remind you in verse 13 and 14 says, and you speak to the children of Israel, saying, my Sabbaths you are to guard by all means, for it is a sign between me and you throughout your generations, to know that I, Yahweh, am setting you apart. And you shall guard the Sabbath, for it is set apart to you. Everyone who profanes it shall certainly put to death. For anyone who does work on it, that being shall be cut off from among his people. So, one needs to ask oneself, am I seeking my own desire? And is this keeping the day set apart to Yahweh? That's how we get to where we figure out what to do and what not to do. All right? Okay. So let's give this a little run through and see how it works. All right? How about reading Time magazine or Home and Garden, Motor Trend, or Consumer Reports magazine on the Sabbath? Now note that I left out reading sin-centered magazines that Yahweh's not okay with any time. Okay? I left those out. All right? How about that? Am I seeking my own desire, and am I keeping the day set apart to Yahweh? Going and searching news sites or things like that on the internet on the Sabbath. You know, checking on worldly things, checking on a bank statement, checking on, what the power bill is, stuff like that. Notice I didn't say going to sites that are sin focused that Yahweh's not going to be okay with anyway. All right? Am I seeking my own desire, and this is keeping the day set apart to Yahweh? Okay? How about going swimming or fishing or biking or a rigorous walk on the Sabbath? Note that I left out sinful recreation that Yahweh would find inappropriate at any time. Right? Am I seeking my own desire, and is this keeping the day set apart to Yahweh? See how easy this gets when you boil it down like that? Visiting friends and family and neighbors who are not setting the day apart to Yahweh. Right? Notice that I did not say hanging out with people that Yahweh would not find pleasing at any time. Am I seeking my own desires, and is this keeping the day set apart to Yahweh? Probably not. Right? How about watching a John Wayne movie or Lassie or Leave It to Beaver or Andy Griffith? Of course, somebody did point out to me, Andy Griffith, he lies a lot. Yeah, he does. Nevertheless, notice that I left out stuff that's absolutely sin-centered viewing that Yahweh would not find pleasing at any time. See, sometimes if we will just ask ourselves this question, the answer will become pretty clear. Amen? It gets real easy. The reason that I'm so familiar with these questions is because I, like most Sabbath keepers, have done most of them in the past. And for me, a good rule of thumb is to ask, am I seeking my own desire, and is this keeping the day set apart to Yahweh? All right? And then you got folks that want to try to find loopholes. It's been quite a while since we talked about loopholes, but here's a question. What is a snare? It's a trap. That's right. It's a trap set by a hunter consisting of a loophole placed around the bait. Okay? Now, one time when I was talking about this, Joey added a little play on words. Joey said, a snare is a trap set by a hunter consisting of a loophole placed around the bait. The hunter here is, of course, Hasatan. Right? And oftentimes, he uses debate to lead us away from righteous decisions. Proverbs 21:2 says, all a man's ways are right in his own eyes, but Yahweh weighs the heart. Right? It's kind of like an example is these folks that try to figure out why it's okay for them, they call themselves Sabbath keepers, all right, but why it's okay for them to allow another human being to wait on them and cook for them and exchange money with them on Shabbat, yet the Sabbath keeper thinks that he's okay with Yahweh because not making them work. They'd be doing it anyway. Same thing goes of houses of ill repute. You know, so why don't we go in there? I said, oh, we can't do that. That's a sin. So, not making them do it. Be doing it anyway, right? I know when you boil it down like that, that's not a real good excuse, is it? Because it says neither you nor your son nor your daughter nor your maidservant nor your male servant, even your cattle. All right? It's a funny thing. The zitzit was given after a man was stoned to death for breaking the Sabbath. And the person who gave me the most grief about the zitzit was a Sabbath keeper that would go out on the Sabbath and let people serve him at the restaurants. Isn't that interesting? Go and read Ezra and Nehemiah, and you will see that besides Torah breaking in general, that there were three things in particular that caused Yisrael to be taken into captivity, or Judah in particular. Sabbath breaking was among the three. And in Nehemiah 13, he even has to threaten non-Yisraelites, merchants, with physical harm and lock the gates so that the Israelites would stop buying and selling with non-Israelites. So this whole well, they'll be doing it anyway stuff doesn't seem to be playing out real well in Ezra and Nehemiah. Okay? One big pitfall for people is covering up a bad motive with a good motive. I mean, after all, did not Yeshua say that it was all right to do good on the Sabbath? And did he not say that it was only natural to pull your ox or your donkey if he falls in a ditch out on the Sabbath? You know, Luke 14:5 is just one verse. You don't have to read there. You're familiar with it. And he said to them, which of you having a donkey or an ox that has fallen into the pit shall not immediately pull him out on the Sabbath day? All right, listen. Every donkey that brays and every ox that bellows is not in a ditch. And sometimes people go push one in. Listen, now I'm guilty of this. And I'll share this with you. We used to be heavily involved in Cub Scouting and Boy Scouting in another life. Now, we were Sabbath keepers. We weren't exactly in this walk at that time, all right? And we were really seeking our own desire because we were enjoying Scouts so much, and they do a lot of things on Sabbath. They have camporees and cubberees and all these things. And I would say things like, well, we have these boys and we pray before meals and we have prayer, and sometimes we'll have a minister or somebody come in and talk for a little while, tell them a story and so forth, and you know, and if we weren't doing that, some of these kids wouldn't have any exposure to anything about the Scripture at all. And so we would do that to justify why we were doing what we were doing. We were covering up a bad motive with a good motive. Okay? Sometimes when it comes to that ox or that donkey, I think we put the old boy in there so that we'll have an excuse to go get him out. And just because I found what I thought to be a loophole that I was okay with, I have to admit that I was seeking my own desires, and it didn't necessarily make it okay with Yahweh. You know what I mean? All right? So, let's not forget the one who gives everlasting life. Turn me to Psalm 44. We're going to do two single verses here real quick. Psalm 44. We're going to be at page 670. And we're going to read verse 21. Would Elohim not search this out? For he knows the secrets of the heart. Can't fool Elohim. All right. Psalm 94. Page 698. Verse 11. Yahweh knows the thoughts of man, that they are but a breath. We ain't fooling Yahweh, and he can see through our bull. And when we was reading, I like this one. When we were reading Hosea yesterday, it talked about the bulls of our lips, the praises we lift up. It didn't say the bull from our lips. All right? We not fooling Yahweh. Paul said, work out your own deliverance. But he did not mean that whatever you decided to work out would be okay. That's not, because see, that's not what he said, brothers and sisters. He said to work out your own deliverance with what? Fear and trembling. I always love it. People will quote that. They'll say, Paul said to work out your own deliverance. They'll say it that way. I'll say, yeah, with fear and trembling. Even the demons believe and tremble. That's right. All right. Now, I cannot tell you exactly what you should or should not do to keep Shabbat. I simply remind you that the word of Yahweh says in Deuteronomy 10:16. Let's all turn there. It's a good one for us to put our eyes on. Devarim 10:16. And you shall circumcise the foreskin of your heart and harden your neck no more. Amen? That's a good one to read. And I ask you to remember this question if you find it helpful. Am I seeking my own desire? And is this keeping the day set apart to Yahweh? And our last scripture today is one we've read before, is Isaiah 58. And we're going to start reading in verse 13. If you do turn back your foot from the Sabbath, from doing your pleasure on my set-apart day, and shall call the Sabbath a delight, the set-apart day of Yahweh esteemed, and shall esteem it, not doing your own ways, nor finding your own pleasure, nor speaking your own words, then you shall delight yourself in Yahweh, and I shall cause you to ride on the heights of the earth, and feed you with the inheritance of Yaakov your father. For the mouth of Yahweh has spoken. So let us remember the Sabbath day. Yevrakeka Yahweh ba'ish mereka, ya'er Yahweh panavaleka bikuneka. Yasa Yahweh panavaleka bi'asem lakash shalom. Yahweh bless you and guard you. Yahweh make His face to shine upon you and show favor to you. Yahweh lift up His face upon you and give you His complete contentment.